Before anything changes, there is usually a quiet beginning. Not the kind that announces itself, but one that slips in unnoticed. It arrives in a pause between thoughts, in a breath held just a moment longer than usual. Nothing dramatic happens here. No clear lesson reveals itself. Only a subtle awareness that something inside has grown still. In this quiet beginning, there is no urgency to explain, no pressure to respond. The world continues moving as it always has, but within, there is a gentle slowing. It is often mistaken for emptiness, yet it is not empty at all. It is full of listening, full of observation, full of a presence that has learned for the first time to wait. This is where the story truly starts, not with action, but with restraint, not with answers, but with a willingness to sit beside unanswered questions. Many overlook this moment because it feels too small to matter. But it is here, in this unremarkable stillness, that inner strength quietly begins to form. They may not notice it. From the outside, nothing seems different. The same routines unfold, the same faces pass by. Conversations continue, often loud, often hurried. Yet beneath the surface, something subtle has shifted. A line has been crossed, not outwardly, but inwardly. The need to be seen, to be heard immediately, to correct or defend, begins to loosen its grip. At first, this quiet can feel unsettling. The mind searches for familiar noise, for reactions that once provided a sense of control. Without them, there is a strange vulnerability, a feeling of standing alone in a wide, open space. But there is also honesty here, a rare kind, one that does not rush to decorate itself with explanations. In this beginning, emotions are not pushed away, nor are they acted upon. They are simply allowed to exist. Anger without expression, sadness without performance, hope without announcement. Each feeling passes through gently, like clouds moving across a wide sky. None are chased, none are resisted. This stillness is not weakness. It only appears that way to those who have never lingered here, those who confuse silence with surrender. But silence, when chosen, carries a different weight. It is not an absence of power, it is the gathering of it. There is a quiet dignity in this moment, a kind of self-respect that does not ask to be recognized. No one is watching closely enough to applaud it. And that is precisely why it matters, because it exists even when unseen. This beginning asks for nothing. It does not demand change from the world or understanding from others. It simply offers a place to stand, steady, observant, and grounded. From here, reactions are no longer automatic. Words are no longer weapons or shields. They become optional. Time feels different in this space, slower, but fuller. Each second holds more awareness than before. Small details emerge. The tone behind words, the space between gestures, the emotions beneath behavior. Understanding deepens not because more is said, but because more is noticed. And though it may not feel like progress, it is. Quiet progress. The kind that reshapes a life without announcing itself. The kind that prepares the heart for choices yet to come. Every journey toward inner strength begins this way, not with force, but with stillness, not with clarity, but with patience. This quiet beginning does not promise comfort, but it offers something more lasting, a foundation, one built not on reaction but on awareness, one that will hold long after the noise fades. Silence does not always feel peaceful at first. Often it feels heavy. It presses gently against the chest, asking questions that have no immediate answers. In this space, there is no distraction to soften the edges of emotion. Everything that was once hidden behind quick responses and familiar reactions now stands quietly in the open. This is where discomfort begins to speak, not loudly, but persistently. Thoughts return again and again, circling the same moments, the same words left unsaid. The mind wonders if silence was the right choice, or if it was simply avoidance dressed as calm. There is an urge to fill the quiet, to say something, anything, just to relieve the pressure. They seem so comfortable with noise, with constant expression, with reactions that spill out effortlessly. Watching this can deepen the discomfort. It creates the sense of being out of step, as though standing still while the world rushes past. Silence, in comparison, feels slow, exposed, almost unsafe. In this heaviness, emotions feel sharper. A single memory can carry unexpected weight. A small misunderstanding can echo longer than it should. Without immediate release, feelings linger. They ask to be acknowledged rather than resolved. And that is not always easy. There is a quiet fear here that by remaining silent, something important will be lost, that respect will fade, that boundaries will blur. The mind rehearses conversations that never happen, imagining outcomes that never arrive. Silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not only what was experienced, but what is feared. Yet within this discomfort, something important is happening. The heaviness is not punishment. It is pressure shaping awareness. Just as muscles grow under resistance, emotional strength forms here slowly and invisibly. Silence brings weight because it asks the heart to carry its own truth without immediate validation. In this space, old habits begin to loosen, the reflex to explain, the need to be understood right away, the desire to control how one is perceived. Without action, these impulses soften, not because they disappear, but because they are finally seen for what they are. The silence feels long because it is unfamiliar. It has not yet been trusted. It has not yet proven itself. And so it feels like standing on uncertain ground, waiting for something to give way. But the ground does not move. It holds. There is a lesson hidden in this heaviness. Not one that announces itself clearly, but one that reveals itself through endurance. By staying present with discomfort, the heart learns that it can survive without immediate relief, that it does not break simply because it is quiet. They may interpret this silence in their own way. Some will assume indifference, others may sense distance, but their interpretations no longer define what this silence means. Its meaning is being shaped inwardly now, not outwardly. Gradually, the heaviness begins to change, not by lifting completely, but by settling. It becomes less sharp, less urgent. The silence starts to feel less like pressure and more like depth, a place where emotions are not suppressed, but held gently. This is the moment many turn back, when discomfort tempts them to return to familiar noise. But staying here just a little longer reveals something rare, the realization that silence does not demand action. It asks for patience, and in that patience, strength begins to form quietly. Not the kind that resists, but the kind that endures. Not the kind that reacts, but the kind that understands. The heaviness of silence is not the end of the journey. It is the passage through which deeper calm is reached. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being misunderstood. It does not announce itself with conflict or harsh word. It settles quietly, like a distance that cannot quite be explained. In silence, this feeling grows more noticeable. When nothing is clarified, assumptions begin to take their place. They watch from the outside and draw their own conclusions. To them, silence looks like agreement or indifference or retreat. They do not see the reflection happening beneath the surface. They do not feel the careful restraint, the weight of what is being held rather than released. And so the story they tell themselves begins to drift away from the truth. This is where the ache deepens. Not because words are missing, but because intention is unseen. There is a quiet wish to be understood without having to explain, to be trusted without having to defend. Yet silence offers no guarantees. It allows others to fill the empty space with their own meanings. Moments arise when it would be easy to speak, to correct a misunderstanding, to restore an image that feels distorted. The words line up clearly in the mind, ready to be released. And still they remain unspoken, not from fear, but from a growing awareness that not every misinterpretation requires correction. They may assume distance where there is thoughtfulness, coldness where there is care, weakness where there is discipline. And there is a subtle pain in knowing this, because being unseen touches something deeply human, the desire to be known as one truly is. Yet here, another realization begins to form. Understanding is not something that can be demanded. It cannot be forced into existence through explanation alone. Sometimes, clarity arrives only when it is allowed to unfold naturally, and sometimes it never arrives at all. This truth can feel unfair. Silence carries the cost of being misread, of standing quietly while others shape a narrative that does not quite fit. The instinct is to intervene, to restore balance, but doing so would require trading inner steadiness for momentary relief. There is strength in resisting that trade, not a loud strength, but a composed one. It recognizes that self-respect does not depend on being accurately interpreted by everyone. That inner alignment matters more than outer agreement. They continue on, unchanged in behavior, yet altered in perception. Each misunderstanding becomes a quiet test, a moment that asks whether peace is worth more than approval, whether calm is worth more than clarity. Over time, something shifts. The need to be understood begins to soften, not because it disappears, but because it loses its urgency. The heart learns that being true does not require constant explanation, that sincerity can exist even when it is not recognized. There is a quiet freedom in this, a release from the exhausting cycle of correction and defense. Silence becomes a filter, revealing which connections rely on noise and which can endure quiet. Those who look deeper may begin to notice. They may sense the consistency, the steadiness that does not waver with opinion. Others may never see it, and both outcomes become acceptable. Being misunderstood no longer feels like a wound. It becomes a signpost, a reminder that inner clarity has taken precedence over outer perception, that the story being lived matters more than the one being told. In this space, silence transforms again. It is no longer just restraint, it becomes discernment, a quiet choice to let actions, not explanations, speak in their own time. And with that choice, a deeper sense of self begins to settle, steady, unshaken, and quietly whole. At some point, without announcement, attention begins to turn inward, not as an escape from the world, but as a return to something that was always there. After the weight of silence and the ache of being misunderstood, there comes a pause that feels different, quieter, clearer, as though the noise outside has finally lost its authority. This turning inward is subtle. It does not arrive with certainty or confidence. It arrives as a question gently asked, what remains when nothing is said? In that question, the need to react begins to loosen and something deeper takes its place. Here, awareness shifts from how things appear to how they feel. The body speaks more clearly. Emotions reveal their true shape, not as problems to solve, but as signals to understand. There is no rush to label them right or wrong. They are simply noticed. This inward space feels honest, unfiltered. Without the pressure to perform or persuade, thoughts slow down. The mind no longer scans for threats or approval. It listens. And in listening, it begins to recognize patterns that were once invisible. Old reactions appear in a new light. The urge to explain, to defend, to respond quickly, each is seen not as necessity, but as habit, learned responses shaped by moments long past. And with this recognition comes a quiet compassion for the self, not judgment, but understanding. They fade into the background here. Their opinions, their expectations, their interpretations lose their sharpness, not because they no longer exist, but because they no longer define the center of attention. The focus has shifted to something steadier. In this inward turning, a realization begins to form. Strength does not require constant expression. It does not need validation to exist. It lives quietly in alignment, in the feeling of being at peace with one's own choices, even when they are unseen. There is relief in this, a soft release from the exhausting effort of managing perception. The heart rests in its own presence. For the first time, silence feels less like restraint and more like refuge. Questions still arise, but they no longer demand immediate answers. Uncertainty becomes tolerable, even meaningful. It invites patience rather than panic. The space within grows wider, more accommodating. This is not withdrawal, it is clarity. A deeper understanding that not every moment requires engagement. That attention is a form of energy, and where it is placed, shapes what grows. As attention settles inward, values become clearer. What matters and what does not begins to separate naturally. Some things lose their urgency. Others gain quiet importance. Boundaries form not from resistance but from respect. There is a sense of coming home here, to a self that does not need to be defended loudly, to a calm that does not depend on circumstances. The world continues to move. Misunderstandings still exist, but they no longer pull as strongly. They may continue to speak, to assume, to react, but their movements feel distant now, like waves observed from the shore rather than felt from within. There is space between stimulus and response. And in that space, choice appears. This inward realization does not seek recognition. It does not announce a transformation. It simply settles in, reshaping perspective quietly. The way one listens changes, the way one waits changes, the way one chooses changes. Silence is no longer something to endure, it becomes something to trust, a place where clarity grows naturally without force. And from this turning inward, a new steadiness emerges, unshaken by misunderstanding, grounded in self-awareness, and quietly ready for what comes next. There comes a moment when silence is no longer accidental. It is no longer something that happens by hesitation or uncertainty. It becomes a choice, quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal. In this moment, the urge to react still appears, but it is met with awareness rather than obedience. The feeling arrives first, a familiar tightening in the chest, a quickening of thought. The impulse to respond, to correct, to protect. These sensations have not disappeared. They rise just as they always have. But now there is space around them. A pause that did not exist before. In that pause, something important is recognized. Reaction has a cost. It often brings momentary relief, but it also carries consequences, emotional exhaustion, regret, a lingering sense of having given away something precious. Silence, by contrast, asks for patience, but it offers something steadier in return. They may provoke without intending to, or perhaps they do so knowingly. Words are spoken, gestures made, expectations implied. The invitation to react is quietly extended, and for the first time it is not automatically accepted. Choosing silence does not feel like victory, it feels like restraint, like holding a door closed against a strong wind. There is effort here, a conscious decision to remain still while something inside wants to move. Yet this restraint is not suppression. It is discernment, the understanding that not every moment deserves the same level of engagement, that some situations are better met with stillness than with response. In choosing silence, self-respect becomes visible, if only inwardly. There is a recognition that peace is not found by winning every exchange, but by protecting inner balance, that dignity does not need to announce itself to, "Oh, be real." They may interpret this choice in many ways. Some will assume indifference. Others may push harder, mistaking quiet for permission. But the meaning of silence is no longer shaped by their reaction. It is shaped by intention. There is a quiet empowerment here, a sense of reclaiming control, not over others, but over oneself. The ability to remain calm in the presence of provocation becomes a form of inner authority, one that does not require acknowledgement. This choice is not made once, but many times. Each moment of restraint reinforces the next. Slowly, the habit of reaction weakens. In its place, a new habit forms, the habit of observing before engaging. Silence becomes a boundary, not rigid, but clear. It signals where energy will and will not be spent, where attention is offered freely and where it is withheld with care. In this space, reactions are no longer driven by emotion alone. They are guided by values, by an understanding of what aligns with inner peace, what serves growth rather than momentary relief. The world does not change because of this choice. Conversations continue, tensions arise, expectations remain, but the experience of moving through them is transformed. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. There is a subtle confidence in this, not loud or visible, but deeply felt. The knowledge that silence is not avoidance, but wisdom in motion. That choosing not to react can be an act of strength, rather than surrender. Over time, the effort lessens. What once required restraint begins to feel natural. Silence no longer feels like something being held back. It feels like something being held steady. And in that steadiness, a deeper calm takes root. One that does not depend on outcomes. One that remains intact regardless of how others respond. The choice not to react becomes a quiet commitment to self-respect, to inner balance, and to a peace that does not need to be defended. Growth does not always arrive through action. Sometimes it emerges through what is deliberately withheld. In the space created by restraint, something subtle begins to take shape, slowly, quietly, without announcement. This is the kind of growth that is easy to overlook, because it does not ask to be seen. Each moment of restraint carries a lesson, not a sharp one, but a gentle one, learned through repetition. The heart begins to recognize that it can hold emotion without being ruled by it, that feelings can rise and fall without demanding expression. This realization does not dull emotion, it refines it. They continue to act as they always have. Patterns repeat, familiar tensions surface. Yet the inner response is different now. Where there was once immediacy, there is now consideration. Where there was urgency, there is now patience. This patience is not passive, it is active in its own way. It requires awareness, presence, and an ongoing choice to remain grounded. Each time restraint is chosen, the inner space expands slightly. The pause becomes more comfortable, the silence more natural. Through this process, clarity deepens. Situations are no longer viewed only through the lens of emotion, but through understanding. Motives become clearer. Intentions are seen more accurately. What once felt personal begins to feel contextual. There is a quiet strengthening of boundaries here, not the kind enforced through confrontation, but the kind maintained through consistency. Restraint communicates without words. It signals self-respect even when it is not recognized. The mind, once quick to react, begins to trust this new rhythm. It learns that not responding immediately does not mean losing control. In fact, it often means gaining it. Control over tone, over timing, over energy. They may still misunderstand. They may still test limits. But their actions no longer dictate the internal state. Emotional independence begins to form, not as detachment, but as stability. With this stability comes discernment. Not every silence is the same. Some moments call for response, others for quiet. Growth lies in knowing the difference. Restraint sharpens this awareness, teaching when to speak and when to wait. Over time, emotional reactions soften, not because the heart has hardened, but because it has matured. Sensitivity remains, but it is balanced by understanding. Compassion grows, not only for others, but for oneself. There is less internal conflict now, less replaying of conversations, less self-criticism. The energy once spent on reaction is redirected inward toward reflection and clarity. This growth is not linear. Some days restraint feels easy, other days it feels heavy again. But even on those days, something has changed. Awareness remains. The choice is still present. They may never acknowledge this shift. There may be no recognition, no validation. And yet, the growth continues, quietly reshaping how life is experienced. Restraint teaches a deep lesson, that peace is not found by controlling circumstances, but by understanding oneself. That strength is not measured by how forcefully one reacts, but by how calmly one remains. In this way, restraint becomes more than a choice. It becomes a way of being, a steady presence that moves through complexity without being consumed by it. What grows here is not visible on the surface, but it is felt in every interaction, in the ease of letting things pass, in the confidence of knowing when to engage and when to remain still. This is growth that endures, not because it is loud, but because it is rooted. And in that rootedness, the heart becomes quietly strong, capable of holding emotion, honoring boundaries, and moving forward with calm resolve. Growth does not always arrive through action. Sometimes it emerges through what is deliberately withheld. In the space created by restraint, something subtle begins to take shape, slowly, quietly, without announcement. Is the kind of growth that is easy to overlook, because it does not ask to be seen. Each moment of restraint carries a lesson, not a sharp one, but a gentle one, learned through repetition. The heart begins to recognize that it can hold emotion without being ruled by it, that feelings can rise and fall without demanding expression. This realization does not dull emotion, it refines it. They continue to act as they always have. Patterns repeat. Familiar tensions surface, yet the inner response is different now. Where there was once immediacy, there is now consideration. Where there was urgency, there is now patience. This patience is not passive. It is active in its own way. It requires awareness, presence, and an ongoing choice to remain grounded. Each time restraint is chosen, the inner space expands slightly. The pause becomes more comfortable, the silence more natural. Through this process, clarity deepens. Situations are no longer viewed only through the lens of emotion, but through understanding. Motives become clearer. Intentions are seen more accurately. What once felt personal begins to feel contextual. There is a quiet strengthening of boundaries here, not the kind enforced through confrontation, but the kind maintained through consistency. Restraint communicates without words. It signals self-respect even when it is not recognized. The mind, once quick to react, begins to trust this new rhythm. It learns that not responding immediately does not mean losing control. In fact, it often means gaining it. Control over tone. Over timing. Over energy. They may still misunderstand. They may still test limits, but their actions no longer dictate the internal state. Emotional independence begins to form, not as detachment, but as stability. With this stability comes discernment. Not every silence is the same. Some moments call for response, others for quiet. Growth lies in knowing the difference. Restraint sharpens this awareness, teaching when to speak and when to wait. Over time, emotional reactions soften, not because the heart has hardened, but because it has matured. Sensitivity remains, but it is balanced by understanding. Compassion grows, not only for others, but for oneself. There is less internal conflict now, less replaying of conversations, less self-criticism. The energy once spent on reaction is redirected inward toward reflection and clarity. This growth is not linear. Some days restraint feels easy. Other days it feels heavy again. But even on those days, something has changed. Awareness remains. The choice is still present. They may never acknowledge this shift. There may be no recognition, no validation. And yet, the growth continues, quietly reshaping how life is experienced. Restraint teaches a deep lesson that peace is not found by controlling circumstances but by understanding oneself. That strength is not measured by how forcefully one reacts, but by how calmly one remains. In this way, restraint becomes more than a choice. It becomes a way of being, a steady presence to Hat moves through complexity without being consumed by it. What grows here is not visible on the surface, but it is felt in every interaction, in the ease of letting things pass, in the confidence of knowing when to engage and when to remain still. This is growth that endures, not because it is loud, but because it is rooted. And in that rootedness, the heart becomes quietly strong, capable of holding emotion, honoring boundaries, and moving forward with calm resolve. There is a kind of power that never announces itself. It does not raise its voice or demand attention. It does not seek agreement or victory. It simply exists, steady and unmoved, like something deeply rooted beneath the surface. This is the power that grows in quiet. At first, it feels unfamiliar. So much of what is called strength in the world is loud, visible, reactive. It proves itself through assertion, through dominance, through being seen. But this quieter power asks for none of that. It is not concerned with how it appears. It is concerned only with how it holds. They may not recognize it. In fact, they often overlook it entirely. To them, power is something that interrupts, that corrects, that responds immediately. Silence, in contrast, appears passive. Yet beneath that silence, there is composure, there is choice, there is intention. This kind of power does not come from control over others. It comes from mastery of the self, the ability to remain centered when emotions stir, the ability to listen without absorbing, the ability to stand firm without needing to push back. There is a deep confidence here, one that does not depend on outcome. Whether things go as hoped or not, this power remains intact. It is not shaken by misunderstanding or challenged by provocation. It does not rise and fall with opinion. The quiet power is felt most strongly in moments of tension, when words are expected, when reactions are anticipated, and yet calm remains, not as defiance, but as presence, a steady awareness that nothing needs to be proven. They may test this stillness. They may speak louder, push further, waiting for a response. But the absence of reaction is not an absence of strength. It is a refusal to be drawn into unnecessary struggle. There is dignity in this refusal, a sense of self that does not bend under pressure. Silence here is not empty. It is full of clarity, of restraint, of discernment. This power changes the way the world is experienced. Challenges no longer feel like threats. Criticism no longer feels like an attack. There is distance between stimulus and response, and in that distance, freedom appears. Freedom from the need to defend, freedom from the need to explain, freedom from the cycle of reaction that once drained energy and focus. The quiet power conserves what matters. It also sharpens perception. Without the noise of reaction, it becomes easier to see situations as they truly are. Motives are clearer, patterns are recognized, choices are made wit. Intention rather than impulse. They may mistake this composure for detachment, but it is not detachment. It is engagement on a different level, one that values depth over drama, stability over spectacle. There is also humility here. Quiet power does not assume superiority. It does not look down or seek to rise above. It simply stands where it is, grounded and aware. Over time, this power becomes unmistakable, not because it announces itself, but because it remains consistent. It does not fluctuate with mood or circumstance. It is reliable. Those who move through life in constant reaction often feel exhausted. Those who carry this quiet power move with steadiness. They conserve energy. They choose their moments. This power does not reject emotion. It understands it. It allows feeling without surrendering direction. It listens, then decides. In this way, silence becomes a language of its own, one that communicates strength without conflict, presence without performance, authority without force. And though it makes no noise, it leaves a lasting impression, not on everyone, but on those who are attentive enough to notice what does not need to be said. This is power that endures, not because it is loud, but because it is rooted deeply within. A calm force, steady and unshaken, moving through the world without resistance and without losing itself.